Okay. The plan today, I will spend about 90 minutes to 2 hours just to go over a solution with you about lab test example lab test 3. And then until 5 p.m., I'm happy to take questions you may have. Okay? You can ask me questions at the end. I'll try to do the first part as thoroughly as possible. You can feel free to interrupt me if you want to. Okay? It's been a while, so it's okay if you forget about some critical aspects, but hopefully you can pick them up through the lecture. Okay? As I said, the iPad doesn't work, so I'm going to write on the blackboard. Okay? Good. Okay. I would like to basically, first of all, get it very clear about what you're going to do for lab test 3. Okay? You should know how to download it, right? So if you go to our course website, go to lectures, and then you can go under, over here, preparation guide for lab test 3. That's something you should really read in detail. And there is a zip folder that you can download. It contains all the starter code for you to start, okay? In case you haven't done that yet. Okay, so now, what you will be given in the lab test, number 3, will be like this. Let me just try to explain and try to tell you what the general strategy is. Okay, so now, basically, you will be given, roughly speaking, you'll be given 3 classes plus 1. Okay, let me explain what a plus 1 means. For example, in the case of the example, you will be given something, for example, called shop tester or other tester. It can be class management system tester. Okay, let's just have an idea. For this tester over here, you can see there is a main method so that you can execute the tester and get some output to the console. All right, there's only going to be a single class that has a main method. Apparently, initially, nothing's going to compile, nothing. Okay, that's why you're going to do some work, which I'll guide you through. On the other hand, you also got member, order, and shop. Okay, so these 3 classes. I would say the maximum number of classes you will get in the lab test 3 will be 3. Pretty much like how you can expect from the example. Okay, so let's now talk about how you can understand the structure. Okay, so now over here you have your shop tester. Okay, shop tester where you have a main method. Okay, so this is the only thing that you have to execute. Okay, apart from that, there will be up to 3 classes where the shop tester will refer to, like a reference. For example, you can see that inside the body of the shop tester class, you can see we refer to order, we also refer to member, we also refer to shop somewhere. Let me just find it out. You also refer to shop. So these are the classes that the shop tester depends on. Okay, let's draw that first to make it clear. So you have order over here. You also have member. And you also have shop. Okay? So basically, shop tester depends on these 3 classes. Okay, I'll just say uses. Okay, conceptually that's the case. So that's how you understand the 4 classes. Now, how should you proceed? Imagine that eventually you're going to make everything compile, which is not initially the case. Okay, so now that means you're going to somehow send the shop tester somehow. Well, it's already there. So imagine that this is Android Studio that I just opened. Let me put it here, Android Studio. Okay, Android Studio here. And then you have to make a compile. And also do some editing. Okay? As soon as the shop tester becomes executable, or as soon as it becomes compilable, you're going to execute it. And what you will do is it's going to display some output on the console. Okay? So you're going to execute it. Okay? At the bottom here, I'm going to write some outputs. I would say the actual outputs that you're going to see on the console. I'll demonstrate that to you in just a moment. So now, this actual output here is very crucial because in the very beginning phase of your lab test, this actual output wouldn't make too much sense because you haven't done too much work. But eventually, you will hope this actual output over here is going to match whatever the expected output that's sent to you. For example, in the case of the example test 3, let me just open that. If you go inside the folder over here, you will see there's something called expected output. Let's just have a quick look of how it looks like. Something like that, right? Different portions over there, okay? Remember, we also get something called expected output. That's given to you. Expected output. So the question you have to keep asking yourself is whether these two match. If they match, you're done. You're okay with the lab test. If they don't really match exactly, you might get some marks deducted. And remember, it is really crucial that your system over here consisting of the 4 classes, they must compile. Okay, that's the minimum requirements. Okay? Any questions so far about the picture before I add something new? Okay? One more thing. So during the test, your main job is going to implement these 3 classes, which I will do. I'll illustrate to you. And then I'll show you some technique of getting something minimum to compile and execute right away, so you wouldn't panic so much, okay? Okay. If no question here, so I'm gonna follow this workflow basically throughout the illustration, okay? Okay, let's see what we can do. First of all, let's go back to Android Studio over here. What I would suggest you do is go to the shop tester over here. You can see that it doesn't compile. How do I know? You can see there's a red underline over here. It doesn't compile. What I would suggest you do is, first of all, under the main method here, you can see all the different sections, like a 1.1, 1.2, etc. Comment them out just to begin with. Okay? Select all of them. You can say Control and /. Magically, everything just compiles. Okay? And then let's just make sure you can execute something to begin with. Okay? Just say S out. It's going to be sys and the outer print line. Remember the shortcut, right? That's going to save you some time. I'll just say hello just for now. Okay? So how do you execute a code? So go over here, projects, and then right click on shop tester. And then you can say run shop tester.main, the main method. If you click on that, it's going to show something on the console. Okay? Let's see. Okay? It's just hello. Eventually, you want your shop tester to generate exactly what the expected output tells you. Okay? But we're going to do this section by section. Okay? That's what we're going to do. So now, the strategy I would suggest you follow is like this. I'm going to comment back everything except for 1.1, which means I'm putting that back. So that means you only have, instead of so many errors to fix, you only have about, let's say, 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 things to fix to begin with. Okay? Any questions so far? Make sense? Okay? Yes.
Basically, we should probably try to do each part.
Yeah, just do part by part. I would suggest try to comment out everything first. Make sure you can execute the tester, because at this point, if you cannot do it, you should really ask for help from TA or myself. But once you can get it to work part by part, that's what I would suggest. Okay? Okay, let's just tackle section by section. We got about 9 sections to tackle. Okay, but I'll do it slowly just to bring up your memory. But in the lab test, you should really be familiar enough with everything. Okay? So now, let's read it line by line. Let me get back. Let me just get rid of this. Okay? The hello that I just put. Okay? So now, let's try to read it together. So there will be certain principles you have to remember for this particular lab test. Oh, by the way, this lab test has direct relevance to what you're going to learn in 2030 for the first 2 weeks. So I think on the bright side, if you put a lot of efforts into preparing for the remediation, hopefully that will make it easier for 2030, I hope. Okay? So your efforts are not going to be wasted. Okay? So now let's try to read it. Now, remember, we talk about assignments, right? The left-hand side of the assignment, what is it doing? Line number 6. It's trying to declare a type, and the name of the type is called order. At this point, you can see there's no red underline for order. What is that? It is because we already have an order class that's given to you. However, if you look at the order class, you will realize something here. If you double-click on the order class, it's simply just empty, right? I only give you the class like an empty class decoration. There's such a type, but the type is currently useless. So you got to add attributes, you got to add methods and constructor into it. Okay, that's your job. But you got to figure out from the tester what kind of methods you will need. That's something you got to figure out. Okay. So let's now see the right-hand side of the assignment and see what happened. You can see that over here we say new order. I have a question for you. The one I just highlighted, I'm just highlighting now. Does that mean does that refer to a constructor, accessor, or mutator? Which one? Number 1, constructor. Number 2, accessor. Number 3, mutator. 1, 2, or 3? 1, right? How do you know? Because there is a new keyword over here. Okay? So principle number 1, I'm going to write on the left end over here. So these are the principles you should really know very well. Okay? Principle number 1. Whenever you see something on the right-hand side of an assignment, if you see new, for example, new over here, and then I'll just put A, just make it general. Okay? If you have A here, you may have 0 or more parameters over there to take, right? So what does that mean? So that means this is a constructor in class A, taking parameters, I'll say ... here. Depends on what parameters I give to you. In the case of the example test, I gave you 2 versions. One version takes no parameter, and the other version takes, I think, 3. Okay, we'll figure out how to do that. Okay. Okay, let's now come back. Okay, over here, you know what? I'll make it even easier for you. What about we also comment out these 3 lines? Okay, so now we only got 1 line to handle. Now you can see that over here, how many parameters should we get for order? Apparently 3, right? The first one is something like Americano. It's just an example. From seeing the literal over here, you should know the first parameter should be of type string. Okay? What about the second parameter? What should be its type? Give me a valid type. Can it be integer? No, it cannot, right? It can only be integer if you try to do a cast over here, for example, like that, if you want. But that's not what we want, okay? You should not modify the shop tester in this way, okay? So 4.7 reasonable type sounds like maybe double. And then what about 2 over here? The 2 here somehow tells you the best way to do it would be integer. It would be okay if you also use double, but I would say if I don't really give you any decimal point here, that means use integer. Okay? So that means we're going to create a constructor for the order class with 3 parameters. The first parameter of type string, the second one double, and the third one integer. Okay? Let's do that. So now under order over here, we're going to have, remember the constructor being the same name as the class, and then we're going to have string. Okay? Let's just go back here. Somehow you had to figure out some name for the parameters. Apparently, if you read the description for the problem, we are talking about coffee shop, and we're talking about a particular order. And the way you interpret this, so I will expect you to read the problem description after the class. So this one here, Americano, tells me what the product name it is. And this 4.7 tells me what the unit price is. And this 2 over here tells me how many cups I want to buy, right? Things like that, if you see the problem description. So now what I can say is string, and then I would say products, okay? Or you can say name. It's kind of up to you. And I can also say double, let's say price. I can also say integer, let's say, I'll say how many units, like that, okay? After I have done that, you can see that over here, it compiles. You can see that, right? So now I'm going back to the phase where everything compiles. But it's not very useful just yet because I'll leave that to you. When you're doing this back home, try to execute the shop tester right away. You will see that it doesn't produce anything that's useful. It wouldn't print out anything, okay? Okay, let me say we don't really proceed with the constructor just yet. Every time your first priority is get everything to compile. nothing else, okay? And then after things can compile, you execute the tester and see what the output is into the console. If somehow the output matches the expected output, you can proceed to the next one. If it doesn't match, that means you got to do something more to your Java classes, okay? For now, everything compiles, so let's go on, okay? What about the next line? The next line, it says that o1.getProducts, okay? Let's review very quickly. So this is just another principle, okay? So what we get is, let me just see that very quickly. Okay, system.out.print line. I'll just say print line. And then we'll say o1.get products. Okay, like that. Okay. So now the decision you have to make is, first of all, let's just review the terminology. We have a dot notation over here, right? Very specific to Java, being object-oriented. And what about O1? O1 is so-called context objects, right? Context objects. And remember, each object is going to store the address somewhere in the memory. Okay? It does not store the object itself. And I would suggest, if you really think you're lacking the background for this particular lab test, you should really study the tutorial, the background tutorial for lab number 5. Okay? That's what you should study for. Okay, there's a context object which is O1. And remember, where was O1 created? It was here. O1 is here, right? It was created just in the previous line. That is why we can call O1 at this in the next line. And now, question for you. You have to make a decision. Apparently, this is not a constructor, right? Because it's not right after the new keyword, so it's not a constructor. So what can be the remaining possibility? It can be either an accessor, or it can be a mutator. And I'll put a question mark here. It has to be one, but not both. Can you see which one it should be? Accessor or mutator? Accessor, okay, why? The principle is very easy, okay? Think about what's the purpose of calling this method. When I say o1.getProducts, basically, and also this is used in the context of a print line method. That means I want to print out whatever this method is going to return, right? Whenever I talk about return, that's the criterion for accessor. So that's why it's accessor. What about mutator? As we'll see, mutator means it's going to stand alone in a single line without being used for its value. It's just going to change something. Okay, that's kind of the stuff you got to review. But in this case, accessor. Okay. That's principle number 2. You will see a lot of this. Every time you see that the method call is going to return some value that can be used for printout. So that means the method we're talking about is an accessor. Okay, the principle you should know. Okay, okay. Apparently in this case it's not mutator. Okay. So now what should we do? We should try to get something done over here. Okay. Apparently you can see that it is red, telling you there is no such method called getProducts. So we should do something about it. Okay. Before we do something about it, we can get some hints from the expected output. Because remember, everything that has to do with console output using the print line has been given to you in the expected output over here, right? Okay, you can see that 1.1 over here represents this line over here. Okay, what about the next print line? That's exactly over here, system.out.print line. So what's that? Americano over here, right? So that means by calling o1.getProducts, we should really expect to get Americano from the console. Okay, that's what it means. Okay? So now, let me just try to do something here. Okay, so now we have two things that can be concluded. First, we know that the getProducts is going to be an accessor. It's going to return something. And then it's going to return something like Americano. Apparently, this Americano over here is set from the previous constructor over here, Americano, right? You can think about when we construct the objects, we're going to store Americano string into the objects, and then we're using the accessor method to get it out and print it out. Okay? Let's see how we can implement this. Okay? So now we can say the return type should be a string, and then we can say get products. Okay, now you should ask yourself, should I put any parameters for get products? Okay, should we or should we not? Okay, this is not arbitrary. It should be, everything should be suggested either in the expected output or the shop tester. In this case, you can see that in the shop tester, it does not expect any input here, right? What if you put some input? Let's see. So it's really important so you don't run into this mistake in the lab test. If for any reason you also put, for example, string and then products. Okay, and then let's see what happened. Oh, first of all, we got to return something, right? You're going to return something that's string. Okay, let's make it easy. Return empty string. Just return something. Or you can just return null. Okay, what about just null to begin with? Okay, now we can see that over here, this shop tester class does not compile. Let's see exactly why. If you move your mouse over the red underline over here, it says that get products taking a string cannot be applied. So that means there's no, over here, when you define the method here, you're expecting a string. However, when you use it, you do not pass a string, right? There's an inconsistency over here. But remember what I said, you should never ever change the shop tester. Shop tester is like an oracle. It tells you exactly what to do. You shouldn't change that, okay? So the only option you have is to change the class you just defined, which is order, okay? So that is why we can get rid of this, like that, okay? So far it compiles. Okay, let's try a little bit more. So now you can see everything compiles, but are we really doing the right thing exactly, right? How do we tell? Let's execute the code and see what happens. If I execute the code, let's see what the console output is. Okay, this line is not surprising, okay? However, null is opposed to Americano, right? Let's see what's happening here, okay? Let's just go back to the Android Studio here. Let's look again this line over here. So I would suggest you should also review the part when I talk about how you can visualize the objects. Okay, let me just do example here. Okay, I'm going to put all the diagram maybe on this side. Okay. Okay, let's think about how we can draw the diagram for line number 6. Okay. Let's look at the right-hand side of the equality. We say that new order, and then we're going to put Americano 4.7 and also 2 over there, right? Let's draw the visualization first. Okay, so that means we're going to create some order objects. Remember, you put a class type over here, and then somehow you're going to store 3 different values as attributes. You can assume for the purpose of this course, whenever you pass any information in the constructor, it's going to be used as attribute values. That's something you can assume. Just make it easy, okay? May not be the case anymore in 2030, but we'll see, okay? And then over here, for the attribute name, we can simply just use the parameter name that's already given to you in the question. So let's just do that, okay? So the first one, I'll just say pro for products. And then the second one is going to be price, and also the third one is going to be units. I'll just say U. Okay? And somehow we're going to get Americano as the first one, Americano. And then the second one is going to be 4.7. Somehow they have to be stored in the objects. But since we haven't done that yet, but we'll do that in just a moment. And the unit is 2. Okay, so this object is stored somewhere in the memory. Okay, but what about O1? Again, it's really important for you to remember. Whenever we declare a variable of the object type, it's only going to store address. Okay, so that means O1 conceptually is only going to point to this particular object. Okay, O1 does not represent this object directly. It indirectly points to where the object is in the memory. Okay, something to always keep in mind. Also emphasize that in 2030 if you take it with me in the fall. Okay, okay, that's O1 here. Okay, now let's go to the next line. Okay, over here. Now let's think about what we're doing here. Remember for line number 7, we have O1 dot get products. Okay, that's what you see in the shop tester, right? At the moment, the actual output actual over here, the actual output is simply just null. Because, again, if you go back to what we have implemented so far, it's simply returning null, okay? And then, if you see the expected output, it should be Americano, as you can see from the file, right? Let me just make sure you're 100% following. So that's Americano, right? Over here, okay? Americano. Okay, like that. So there's a mismatch, okay? So now what we want to make sure is when we call O1.getProducts, it's somehow going to retrieve this Americano value from the objects. So there are two things you have to make sure. Number one, Americano is actually stored in the objects. Americano is actually stored in the objects. And number two, you want to make sure the method, the accessor for getProducts is going to return that particular value, right? Okay, and then you're going to say getProducts returns it. Okay, so these are the two things. We have done none of it, okay? That's something we got to do. Okay, now let's try. Let's give it a try. I don't want to give you the perfect code right away, so I want you to see what might go wrong, okay? Now, what about, so now I'm back in the order class. What if I simply say return products? First of all, is this going to compile? Question for you. You don't think it will compile? Uh-huh. Yeah. You can see that over here. Remember the principle, right? With, you can also refer to the scope of variables in the slides. We talk about the scope. You can see that over here cannot resolve symbol products. So that means the compiler, the computer simply doesn't know about this particular variable. But you might argue, well, the product is over here, right? But remember, we talk about scope. The scope for any parameter is only limited to that particular method, right? So it is not known to this particular method here. If you really want to make sure you have a product attribute like this, you better declare that, right? You got to declare that. So we are lacking the declaration, okay? So now what we can do, so this simply wouldn't compile. So what we can do over here is make an attributes. String products. Now it will work. Okay? Do you think now we will get exactly the output? Let's see. Think about it, and then we'll verify by computer. If I try to execute the tester again, it still returns back to me null, right? It still. Why is that? Think about it. Something wrong, I can tell you, for the constructor over here. Something wrong here. Why? Let's be careful. If you go back to the shop tester, when we call this particular order constructor over here, right? Conceptually, we would think, we will hope, it should really set the Americano to be products, 4.7 to be price, and 2 to be the units, conceptually. However, you got to do it. Does the constructor at the moment do any of the assignments? Well, no, right? You can see line number 8 simply empty. So what should we do? You should somehow assign this products over here to this products, right? The attributes. So you can think about the product is given by the user in the shop tester, and the product over here is the information you would like to keep and store in the objects. Okay? So that's the difference. Okay? So shouldn't be too surprising to you. We can simply say this dot products is assigned to products. Okay, that's what we can do. After this, we should be okay. Let's see. Let's verify that. If you now launch over here, what you will get is, yeah, we do have Americano. You can see this line over here matches exactly this Americano. Okay, so you can see that's exactly the thinking process you should have. So let's just recap what we have done. And the other two attributes will be done in a similar way. Let's see. So what we have done was we declare an attribute over here, and then we also define the constructor over here. How do we know the constructor should be declared like this? It was because in the shop tester, line number 6, the right-hand side, besides the new keyword, it tells us the order constructor over here should take exactly 1, 2, and 3 parameters, right? And then line number 7, it tells us the order class. How do we know it's the order class we are talking about? Because the context object 01 was declared as order, right? So whatever method we talk about should be in the order class. And the get product over here should be accessor because we are using its return value and print it out to the console. And now how should we implement that, right? And now you can see also the name here should be informative enough. So that means given the order, I want to get its product name, okay? So it should be very straightforward to use that over here, okay? To say this.products and just return over here, okay? Okay, any questions so far? Just about the very first line, okay? It takes long for me to explain, but hopefully you'll get used to it and you'll be very quick when you do the lab test. Any questions? Am I going too slow or it's okay, right? Okay, good. Okay, so let's remember. You can also review the slides later. Remember, okay, let's see this. The products over here and the products over here, they have the same name, right? The product over here is so-called parameter because it's part of the input list for some method or constructor. On the other hand, the product over here is referring to an attribute of the class because it's declared outside any of the methods, right? So now they are different. But how do you refer to them? Okay? So now inside, okay, I would say inside the context of this constructor, okay, if you write products refers to the parameter. Parameter means input, this one here, okay? But if you want to refer to the attributes that simply happens to have the same name, what can I do? What I can do is I can use this products, right? Okay, let's do one more review very quickly, okay? Now, let's see the definition for get products very quickly, okay? So now, so remember we have the order class, okay, and then we have the attributes over here. And then we also have the constructor here. Order, and then one of the input is simply called string and then products, okay? And others, okay? And then the first line that we have completed so far, we say this dot products is assigned to products. Okay, let's see how we can understand this. Okay, now it's very important for you to understand the context that we talk about these two fragments. First of all, when we say o1.getProducts, so this is in the shop tester class, right, where we use it. Okay. On the other hand, this particular constructor over here, it is defined in the context of the order class. Okay. They are in different contexts. Let's not get confused. Okay. Now, how do we understand that? Okay. This over here is only a definition. It tells you that whenever you try to call the whenever, sorry, let me do it again. Whenever you're trying to call some method, let me just make it complete, beg your pardon. Let me just add one more thing here, okay? So you'll be complete. And also you have string, and you have get products. Okay, and then at the moment, let's see what we have defined. At the moment, we simply say it's going to return products, okay? But I'm gonna mention that to you in just a moment. So we'll say return products. Okay, so this is also in the order class, right? Question for you. Tell me if they are the same. Return products versus return this dot products. Okay, these two lines, don't worry about if it doesn't compile, okay? These two lines, are they the same or they are different? Okay? In this case, they are the same. Why? Is there any parameter for this particular method called products? No, so there's no clash. So that means when you talk about products over here, it definitely refers to the attributes. On the other hand, like a products here. On the other hand, in the case of this method over here, because there was a products defined, so when you talk about product over here, it kind of shadows this definition over here. So we talk about also shadowing, yeah, previously. Okay, so that one, so that's different. Okay, let me just write it down. So here, since there is no parameter, let me write it properly, called products. So omitting this is okay. On the other hand, in the case of the constructor over here, omitting the this is not good. Okay, it's really important. Okay, you might need that for the exam. You might need that. Okay, now let's come back here. So how do we understand this method call here? Let's review. Okay, we know that you can see that it would be better if we say over here to say this dot products. Okay, so you will see exactly what I meant. This dot products. Okay, this dot products, which is the same as just products. So now you can see that we use this over here. We also use this over here in both the constructor and the accessor. How do we understand this particular line method call over here? You can see that these are simply just definition. Okay, just definition for methods. What about this line here? This is more like a use case, which applies the definition, right? But how do we understand the application over here? Okay, you can see whenever you're trying to have a use case, it is going to somehow do some substitution in the definition. How does it do it? You can see O1, as we said, is the context objects. Okay, and the way you understand how this line of method call is going to be executed is as follows. O1, the context objects, is going to replace every occurrence of, let's say for this method over here, get products, right? It's going to replace every occurrence of this by the context objects. In this case, it's going to be O1, conceptually. So that means when you are calling this one here with context object O1, it's going to return O1 dot products. Okay? And what's O1 dot products? If you have set it properly, it's going to be Americano. Okay? Follow? Good? Okay, good. Okay, that's quite a bit of illustration over here. So now we are okay with the first line over here, Americano. You can see the pattern for 1.1 already. We have just done Americano, the first attributes. Let's do the remaining two rather quickly, okay? So now, let's go back to shop tester over here. So let's now comment out these two. Okay, you can see that our code wouldn't compile again because we haven't got get price and we haven't got get quantity. We haven't got them yet. Okay, let's do it in a very similar way. Let's go to order here. Okay, we're going to have basically, let's now, since we understand what should really happen, so there are 3 parts we have to do. First part, declare the attributes. Second part, store the attributes from the constructor. Third part, define an accessor for returning the value of the attributes. Okay, there are 3 parts. Let's do it. Okay, so now the second one is going to be price, and price can be something like 4.7. Okay, let's do it. So we'll say double is an attributes. Let's just call it price. How you call your attribute names are complete your freedom. Okay, I'm just giving you some straightforward examples. What you gotta follow in the lab test will be how you define the methods. The method must be exactly the same, the name, the signature of the methods. But how you do the internal implementation for your attributes is kind of up to you. Okay, so the double price, and then after declaring price, over here we can say how do we store the attributes, right? This dot price, which refers to this price over here, is assigned to price. And third step, we're going to make sure we can return it. So we're going to say double get price. And then we're going to say return this dot price. Of course, in this case, since there's no price parameter, you can also say price. There's no confusion here. Okay, let's do the third one, and then I'll take your questions if you have any. Then we are done with 1.1. Okay, and then finally, the third one, you can see the second one also compile. We'll execute the code in just a moment. What about get quantity? It's going to be integer like 2. Okay, the integer. I tell you what the disadvantage would be if you do double. Even though I said you can, but you gotta be very careful. The bottom line is your actual output in the console must be exactly the same as the expected output. That's the bottom line. Let's see why double in this case may not be good. I'll show you. Okay, if I say double here, and then I will say units. Okay, and then over here, let's make sure we store that value there. This dot units is assigned to units. Okay, and then we'll do like this. Okay, if you simply do double, okay, and then get units, okay, and then if I say return this dot units, okay, let's see if things might compile. Oh, get quantity. Okay, you can see that even though I thought it should be get units, but I was wrong, right? That's a very good example over here. You can see from the shop tester, the method name should not be get units, it should be get quantity. Okay, you see the point, right? Okay, so I was wrong. Let's go back to order here. I should call that get quantity. Okay, like that. So now everything, again, compiles. Let's execute a tester and see what happened. Okay, if I execute a tester over here, I would get Americano 4.7, 2.0. Everything was good except for the third line. Because what I'm expecting from you was not 2.0, it was 2, right? And what's wrong here? Something to do with double. Remember, the difference between double and integer is double has more precision after the decimal point. So even remember, let's say, okay, that's something you can try in Android Studio. I'll leave that to you, but I'll just write it on the board. You can try the following: integer I is assigned to 2. Versus double D is assigned to 2. Okay, the right-hand side is exactly the same. And then, if I try to say print line, I versus print line D, I should expect different outputs, right? Not should be the same, to be precise. Okay, what should be this line here? 2, right? This one, 2.0. Okay, so they are different. As far as lab test 3 is concerned, if you are expected to print out 2, but you actually printed out 2.0, it's considered wrong. Okay, that's why I said you should always pay attention to expected output. That's really important. Okay. Okay, how should we fix this? The best way to fix this, okay, so your best strategy is whenever you see in the lab test for this particular course, you can assume whenever you see anything without the decimal point, you can assume it's always going to be integer. If you see anything with decimal point, it's always going to be double. Okay, just something easy for you. Okay. Okay, so now what we should do is we should go back here and now let's do some refactoring. Let's do some changes. What we can do is now units rather than double, let's do integer. Okay, we're gonna make sure we change every occurrence over there. So now, okay, units integer, that's okay. And then we go there and see get quantity, let's get integer here. Okay, let's try again. And let's see what happened. If you execute the code again, you will see Americano 4.7 and 2. Okay? Any questions? Yes.
So we have to make sure that we do exactly this thing here. Like we, for example, like we have. So the same applies for the second part. Like we have to like in our get price, we have to make sure like we have to maintain like the expected output. Like
yes, yeah. So again, one more thing to highlight, which I didn't. Okay, you can see that whatever that's produced in the console in Android Studio, that's exactly the actual output I'm talking about over here. Okay, and the file which I gave to you as part of the instruction, that's the expected output. So now we managed to satisfy the 3 lines for 1.1. Okay, so we're gonna continue to satisfy the rest. Okay, now let's keep going. Okay, I'm gonna speed up just a little bit. Okay, because somehow hopefully you pick up the basics. Okay, just speed up just a little bit further. Okay, let's now go to 1.2. Okay, now let's try to see 1.2 over here. What I want to do is I want to comment out only up to here. 1.2, only up to here. Okay? You can see that that should correspond to the next 1, 2, and 3. 3 per line, the next 3. Okay, before we look at that, let's see that after commenting, after removing the comments, what we have is we have another compile time error. Okay, let's see what happened. Okay, if you move your mouse over, it simply tells you the order constructor taking no parameter just cannot be applied. There's no such thing. Why? Because if you come back here for order, you can see the only constructor we define takes 3 arguments. 3. But there's no such version of constructor of order that takes no parameter, right? That's missing. That's why the compiler is complaining. So what should we do? Well, define the constructor, right? That's exactly why you just gotta go back and forth between the 3 classes over there and the shop tester. Okay, basically, I want to highlight one more thing to you. Line number 12 and line number 6. Okay, so these 2 lines basically tell you there should be 2 versions of constructor in the order class. Okay, the second version there simply takes nothing. Okay, takes nothing. In some way it's good. That means you don't have to do too much work in the constructor. But let's see. And we'll see what the trouble you might have later. Okay, so now I will simply say, okay, version 1 of constructor taking 3 parameters. Okay, now we're going to say version 2 of constructor taking no parameters. Okay, and then we're going to say order over here. Okay, typically if you only have something like this, just do nothing to begin with. Okay, when it takes no parameter, let me just say one more thing. Taking no parameter typically means all the attributes should be assigned to some initial value automatically. initial or default value. Okay? In this case, products, which is a string, is going to have the default value null. And what about double? 0.0. And for integer, 0. Okay? If we don't do anything, they will just get the default values. Okay? Now, everything compiles again. Let's see what happened. Okay? So now you can see that over here, I want you to compare line number 7, which is here, and line number 13. Okay? Line number 7 and line number 13. Let's see what the difference is. Line number 7 and line number 13. Let's compare them. Okay? So line number 7 is O1.getPrice. Okay, just forget about the print line just for the moment. Okay, so O1.getProducts. Oh, let's not worry about the semicolon. And then what about line number 13? O2.getProducts. Okay, so these are the two lines over here. Let's first of all just compare character by character before we do any meaningful analysis. Okay, you can see that the only thing that's different is one is talk about O1, the other one is talk about O2, and the rest are exactly identical, right? So that means we are really trying to call the same method. The same method, okay? Same. From which class? Well, you will see that O1 and O2, they were both declared of type order. Okay, so we are really talking about exactly the same method called getProducts. Okay, but now O1 and O2, they are different objects, but because they were declared separately. So now calling the same method, but with different context objects, it might return to you different values. Remember, that's what we said in the very beginning of the classes and object lecture. That's something you should review. Okay, but now let's visualize what O2 has been created and see how we can do that. Okay, let's review that. So now let's see line number 12. How do we visualize this? Okay, so now for O2, it's simply calling the second version of the constructor, which does nothing. Every attribute is going to have their default values only, because you can see that over here, the order constructor simply does nothing. Okay, just nothing. Let's see that. Okay, so O1 is here. Okay, I'll put O2 here. Okay, we have O2 here. So O2 is going to point to somewhere in the memory, and that portion of the memory has been used to store objects of type order, right? And also, since it's the order again, so that means we have the same three attributes, which are products, price, and units, right? So just say products, price, and units, okay? So now, what should be their values at the moment? Because you can see the difference between these two constructors. In version number 1, because in order for you to use this particular first version of the constructor, you have to give more information, because you can see over here, to call the first version, you have to pass things like Americano 4.7 and 2. But in order to use the second version, like here, you don't need to pass anything, okay? Like a different options for you, right? So now, for the second version of the constructor, what we will get is nothing, which means all the attributes will have their default values. In this case, for products, it's simply going to be null. Okay, I'll put null here. And for price, 0.0. Units, just 0. Okay, that's how you understand for O2. Okay, understanding this, let's now try to see. You can see everything compiles right now. But now, take a guess. What's going to be the outputs from the next 3 lines? Yeah, and then 0.0 and then 0, right? So you can see that O2.getPrice over here is referring to the price attributes for O2. Okay, so it's going to be 0.0. And also O2.units is going to be the units attribute for O2, right? It's going to be 0. Okay, that's what the program will actually produce. But is that really expected? Let's see. Okay, so now let's execute the code. Let's see what we have. Okay, we got null, 0.0, and 0. Okay, let's see. And that's exactly what we expect. So we're okay so far. You can see we just completed another 3 lines. Okay? But you can, let's just go a little bit like a look ahead. Okay? You can see that the next 3 lines, we are expecting these 3 outputs, which is kind of identical to what we did in 1.1. Conceptually, that means we are trying to really explore 2 ways of initializing your attributes. Version number 1 for 01, you simply pass the information when you first create the objects together, like a single operation. But for version number 2, you initialize all the attributes to the default values first, and then you will call different mutator methods to set up the values. Okay, that's the difference between the 2 versions. But let's see. There's another principle I gotta mention, but let's just go back. Okay, let's now go back to over here, just line number 16 only 16. Okay, so now that will be principle number 3 we should get. Okay, so now principle number 3. So now if you see something like this, O2.setProducts. Okay, and then it's going to take some parameter over here. Let's just say Americano. Okay, now similar concept over here. O2 is the context objects. And then you can see this is simply one of the parameter, right? Question for you. What's really this? Again, every time you see like a method call, there are 3 possibilities. It can be a constructor, it can be accessor, it can be a mutator. In this case, it cannot be a constructor, right? Because it's not after the new keyword, so it's not a constructor. Okay? So it cannot be a constructor. Okay? Can it be accessor? And can it be mutator? That's the decision you have to make. Okay? This is a simple principle for you, okay, which will be useful also for 2030. Basically, like this. If you only see the method call appearing by itself and standing alone like this, as opposed to as part of the print line statements like this, right? In this case, you can assume it's going to be a mutator, okay? So it's going to be a mutator. It cannot be accessor, okay? Accessor, basically, the value you can assume has to be somehow used, must be used somewhere. Somewhere. And principle number 2 simply just tells you you're trying to use O1.getProducts in a print line statement. So that's one use of the return value. On the other hand, you can see O2.setProduct is only stands alone. It is not used anywhere. Okay? So that means it should be a mutator. And what does mutator mean? That means we're going to change the attribute values for the context object O2 here silently. Okay? How do we do that? Okay. Just for principle number 2, let me just mention another example. Okay, there are only 2 examples you should know. Let me just make up one over here, okay? So now, another way for you to determine if a method should be an accessor is like this. Let's say I simply say string, and then I say P over here is assigned to, let's say O1.getProducts. Okay, let's say this line over here. This line is basically similar to this line in the following sense. O1.getProducts, it does not just stand by itself. It's somehow the value is used somewhere. Okay? In this case over here, it is used to be printed out. What about in this case? it is actually used to be stored in some variable, right? So whatever O1.getProducts will return, it is going to be stored in this particular variable called P. Okay, so that's just a second use. Okay, so now principle number 2, let me just summarize very quickly. So there are 2 possible usages. So usages of accessor method. Okay, it can be either used to print, or it can be either used to store in some other variable. Okay, so these are the only 2 possibilities. Okay. Okay, any questions? Okay, so these are the 3 principles you're supposed to know for subtest 3. Yes. No, we will get there. We'll get there. Okay, so now for line number 16, according to principle number 3, we know that set product should be a mutator, which means it should change something. Okay, it should change something. So let me just go back to order class and then just declare that to be a mutator to begin with. And then exactly how you change things it depends on the expected output, what we'll see. So it's going to be mutator, so we'll say void, right? And then set products. And does it take any parameter? It does. It takes something like Americano, which is a string. So that is why you will put string here. Or just a product here. At the moment, let's say we don't do anything. Okay, just at least we just want to make things compile. Okay, let's go back to shop tester. Okay, everything compiles. And now I want to jump a little bit. Let's also uncomment line number 19. Okay, I want you to look at this. First of all, in line number 12, we initialize an object like this, pointed by O2. The product is null, price is 0.0, the unit is 0. Okay, that's what this line does. And when we go to line number 16, okay, over here, we are basically refer to this O2 here as a context object, and we say O2 the set products. At the moment, we do nothing. Okay, and then in line number 19, we try to say O1.getProducts. You know what? It's actually I'm going to go over this. There was a typo here. I should announce this. Okay, so now, you know what? I'll take a note. It should be 19, 20, 21. 19, 20, 21. They should be O2. Okay. So now let me just change that. You are not supposed to do this, but I'll make a typo, right? I'll make sure I don't make that typo in the lab test. Okay, this should be O2. Okay. Now, if you look at line number 19 over here, when I say O2.getProducts, so at the moment, what's going to be output? It's going to be Americano or something else. It's going to be null, right? Because when you say O2.getProducts, it's going to return this because nothing has been set by O2.setProducts yet. Because O2.setProduct does nothing, right? Let's verify that. Okay, let's just execute the code again and see what happened. Okay, you can see that over here, it's simply just null. It is not Americano. But how can we make it Americano? How can we do that? So that means similar, actually very similar. Remember what we did before for the first version of the constructor. Let's try to recall. If you go back to the earlier part of this lecture here, initially we did nothing in this first version of the constructor. In that case, none of the information is stored in the objects, right? That's why we gotta add it. We had to add these lines. So we'll do something similar. What you gotta do is you gotta say this dot products is assigned to products. Okay, that's what you will do. Okay. Now after you have done that, if you try to re-execute the code again, that's what you will get, Americano. Okay. Let's now do one more comparison before I move on to the other methods, okay? So let's compare how O1 and O2 has been created, okay? And you should really see the difference between the two versions. It's really important. Okay, let's see this. Version 1. When we say order O1 is assigned to new order, okay, and then let me just put the first one only, Americano, and something else, okay? And then over here, we say that O1 dot get products. Okay, that's version 1 for O1. What about version 2? So over here you have order O2 is assigned to new order here, and then nothing, right? That's the second version of the constructor, right? Now, if you simply say O2 that get products, print it out. Oh, I should really make it print line. Okay, of course. Okay, and this part for version 1, print line is going to give you Americano. Now, after creating O2, if you simply do print line O2 that get products, it's simply going to give you null, which is not really expected, right? That's something you should really try to set up the value for the attributes. But how do we do that? What you can do is you can call the mutator. You can say O2 dot set products. And then we can say Americano. Okay? And then after that, we can say print line. O2 dot get products. So these two versions are basically doing the same thing, right? But the objects, O1 and O2, they were created differently. Okay, that's something you should really compare. Okay. Okay. Any questions about this? No? We okay? Okay, let's go on. How do we set up the other things? Okay, as you compare the other parts of the output should be 4.7 and 2 for O2. So what we should do is, let's go back there. Let me just do that, the other two rather similarly. Okay, so we can move on to item number, the next item. So you want to set up something else. Okay, you can see that in the shop tester, the next two, one is to set the price, the other one to set the quantity. Okay, let's just go there. Go to the order class, and then set price is just another mutator method. So you would say into double, right? It's going to be 4.7, for example. So double price. This dot price is assigned to price. And similarly, you also get void set units. Let's see if that's it. Should be called set quantity, not set units. Be careful. Okay, you should go exactly what the shop tester is suggesting. Set quantity. Okay, and then I can say integer, maybe units, for example. You can say this dot units is assigned to units. Okay, like that. Okay, now after this, what should we do? Let's go back here, and then you can see that similarly you also get the printout for get price and get quantity for O2. And let's see if they will output this, the right thing. If you try that, let's see what happens. Okay, let's see the output. That's exactly correct. Americano 4.7 and 2, and Americano 4.7 and 2. Okay, and that's about this 1.2. Any question about 1.1 and 1.2? I think up to now, even though there are only 2 sections here, but illustrated already quite many things that we learned before the strike, right? Constructor, accessor, mutator, classes, objects, attributes, etc. Okay. Any questions about this? Okay, good. All right, let's move on. Okay. I would suggest I will try to go until maybe 4:30. And then I will leave half an hour for you if you want to ask questions. I think I just want to go for as far as possible. As you can see, I'm going really slowly. But maybe I should really try to speed up. But I don't want to leave you behind, okay? Because it's an important test. Okay. Okay, let's now move on to item 2, okay, and see how we can continue with that. Item 2. Let's go back to shop tester here, and let's see what we should do for next. Let me just drag this down a little bit. Okay, now, okay, for item 2. So this one here is similar. So here you can see we should no longer, so now, is this line to do with order class or other class? Should be other class, right? Because you can see that the constructor right now is referring to member, not order anymore. So that means we should do something to the member class. So up to this point, we are pretty much done with order class already. Okay, we are done. Okay, so what we should do is go back. Now we should go to the second class that to develop the second class member. Okay, how should we do that? So now this one should be familiar to you. We are going to create a constructor for member class, which will take a single arguments. Okay, 20.0. But what is that? You can see that this informal comments here helps you. It says that a member with initial balance 20.0. That means whatever input you pass to the constructor is going to be the initial balance for this particular member. Okay, but we'll see how you can do that, do the attributes. Okay, so let's go back to the project structure here. Let's just go to member. Okay, and now let's first of all go to the member constructor. As you can see over here, the 20.0 is the initial balance. Okay, and it should be double because it's even though it's 20, but it's a 0.0 with a decimal point. Okay, so now I would say you can say initial balance if you like, but I'll just say balance. Okay, we don't know what to expect to do yet. Okay, now let's just leave that empty. But let me point to you the hints you should really spot. Okay, now you can see that after creating the member objects Allen, okay, we have 25 and 26, right? I'm going to comment these two out. Okay, so these two lines you can see one is called get ID and the other is called get balance. Okay, so these two should be accessors, right? According to principle number 2, because we are using the return values for these two methods in print statements. Okay, so they should be accessors. Okay, and what should be returned by get ID and what should be returned by get balance? Let's figure that out first. Okay, so that'll be the next two lines we should focus on. Okay, so now what should be the output? It should be over here. Get ID should be mem1, and get balance should be 20.0. I hope it's obvious to you. The second one over here, 20.0, is simply the 20.0 that we just passed to this constructor here, right? So it's quite obvious. It's pretty much like a pass Americano and then get products. So now we pass 20.0 and get balance, right? Something like that. But what's really puzzling us is about this get ID. Okay, I'll get to that in just a moment. For now, I'm just going to comment this out, just for now. Let's sort out the get balance first. Okay, this one is easy. Okay, so now let's go to the member here, and apparently we're going to need a double balance, just like how we need products, units, and price in the order class. And then over here we're going to say this dot balance, which can be 20.0 and is assigned to balance. Okay, attributes, constructor, and also accessor, right? So now how do we define the accessor? Double, let's see what the name is. It should be get balance, taking no parameter. Let's get there and say get balance, taking no parameter. Okay, now what should we return? If you just want to make a compile, you can say return 0. was 0.0, default value. But that is not going to be very useful, right? Because the expected output is actually whatever you just passed to Alan. So it should be 20.0. So what should we fix here? The attribute value, right? This dot balance. Okay? So this kind of accessor is quite easy to do. We will see the more complicated one later when we talk about how you can find out how much the member has to pay. We'll get there. Okay? Okay, that's about the get balance. Okay? Now, if you simply just try to execute, let's see what we get. You can see that we do have 20.0. Okay, so this one is done. Okay? But let's just go back to the previous line, get ID. Okay, the get ID over here. The expected value is simply just man1. Okay? It doesn't seem to be very helpful because what do you mean man1? I can cheat a little bit just by doing this. Let's do something very simple. First of all, you know that there should be an accessor, and that should return things like man1. And man1 cannot be a double, cannot be a number. So it got to be a string. Cannot be character, right? Because character should be a single length string. So let's just try to cheat a little bit. Let's go to member here, just to get something work. Okay, so now we got string get ID. And then let me just say return man1. Just that, okay? This will surely to get the output to be a man1. Let's just double check. Because it always return man1, always. You will see that, so now we get man1 and 20.0, and man1 and 20.0. So far we are okay as far as section 2 is concerned, but it's not going to lead you very far. I'll justify why. Let's look ahead. If you try to look at section 3, also the first 2 lines, somehow it's trying to create a new member object. Let's see, from the shop tester. If you go back to the shop tester over here, let's see what happened. So now, let me just uncomment this section over here, like that. Okay, just like that. Oh, by the way, you can see over here, in line number 33, we are encountering the same issue. So here, the member constructor over here takes no parameter, right? That's something we haven't done so far. Let's do it very quickly so we can carry on with our discussion. Okay? So this is just a second version, pretty much like the order. Let's go back to member here. And then we'll do member, just the second version, which takes no parameter. Okay? As if we set balance is assigned to 0.0. You don't have to do it, but it's implicitly the case when you do nothing. Okay? So now, let's go back there. Shop tester. You can see everything compiles. Okay? And now, when we say mark.getID, let's compare. Line number 34, we are trying to say mark.getID. So mark is a context object, which is defined over here. On the other hand, if you see line number 25, Alan.getID, Alan is a different context object. But are we going to get the same ID for these 2 members at the moment? Actually, we would. Are we going to get? Let's remind us how we implement the getID method. If you see that over there, getID is return man1 always, right? Doesn't matter Mark, Alan, Peter, Jonathan, doesn't matter. Always return man1. So it's not very useful. Let's double check, and then we should see how to implement this properly. Okay? Let's just execute this code here. Now, what I want you to look at for section 2 and section 3. Section 2 is about Alan member objects. Section 3 is about a separate, another member object called Mark. But currently, we are getting man1 and man1 for the 2 distinct member objects. But what do we expect to see? Let's go back to the expected output. For section 2, we should see man1. That was okay. But for section 3, we should see man2. And I bet you, if I have another section with another member objects, it should be man3. So there seems to be some kind of like a automatic counting over here, right? Starting with 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4. But somehow the number 1, 2, 3, 4, they are not really passed in the constructor. They're somehow decided internally in the member objects. Have you learned about this before the strike? Anybody want to point to me what's a keyword we should use here? Starting with S. Six characters. No? Static. Yes, exactly. Static. Good man. Static. Yes. Okay, let me point to you where you should look at in details, but I'll just show you how you can do it. Okay? Don't memorize the code. It's not going to lead you very far. I'll just point to you where you should really look at. I think that's exactly what what I said, what I discussed in the very last lecture back in April, a long time ago. Right? Good. So now let me just go to the slides and then tell you where you should look at. Okay, if you go to the classes and objects lecture, and then I will tell you the section you should look at in detail. Okay, if you go to the index, so what you should go to is, bear with me, it should be something about static, which is over here. Basically, in the static variables over there, we talk about how you can figure out the account ID for bank clients, the same. You're figuring out how to assign the IDs to members in a coffee shop, and how you assign ID for students in a course. It's the same idea. Okay? So don't be too surprised if you see something similar in LabTest 3. You should just know how to do it. How to do it? The answer is you should really combine somehow static variables with non-static variables. Okay? Let me just sketch some idea on the board, and then we'll do it together on the Android Studio. Okay? And then you can also review the last lecture I did back in April. Okay? Okay, that's kind of the idea. Okay, so now let's try to see how we can do it. Okay, so now we already got two order objects. I'm going to build on top of this diagram here. I'm going to introduce a member, right? Let's try to work out what we are really stuck at the moment without using the static, without. Let's give a very naive try and see if that might work. Very naive. Let's go back to member over here and see what we can do. Okay, let me say the following. Oh, let me just go back here. Let's ask you a question. As you can see over here, if you see man1 over here, try to be a little bit more creative. Can you increment a string? No. If I got a string s, I cannot say s is assigned to s plus 1. I cannot do it, right? However, I'm expecting to get two strings, like a m1 and also m2, right? So how can I actually do that? So the creative part is like this. Let's try to decompose such string into two parts. The first part is always going to be mem, 3 characters. And the second part is going to be integer, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And in Java, they have a way for you to concatenate, to combine string and integer together. Okay? That's kind of the idea. Okay, let me just illustrate that idea quickly. For example, let me just put it here. That's something you can try as a warm-up. For example, I can say string, let's say, I'll just call a prefix. Always the same prefix, which is man. Okay? And then, let's say we got integer, I will say counter, just count. Initially, just 1. Okay? So these are the important components. And this will also give us some insight or inspiration about how we should implement this properly eventually. Okay? So now, let's see this. Now, let's say string ID1 is assigned to, now I can do to say prefix plus count. This is possible in Java. Okay? You might argue to me, which I will agree to some extent, you might say, how can we add integer and string together? It doesn't make sense. I tell you why it is allowed. I don't quite like this in Java, but that's how it works. What happens is Java will realize you got a string here, you also got an integer here. It will do some implicit conversion for you under the hood without telling you. What it will do is it's going to take whatever string representation for 1 is, which is simply just 1, and concatenate that together with string. So there's some type conversion going on under the hood, okay? Anyway, so now what should we expect to see from this ID1? It should be mem1, right? Okay, that's what we should expect to see. Now, let me do something here. If I say count plus plus, that means I'm going to increment the value for count from 1 to 2, right? And then I'm running out of space. I'm going to put it on the top here. String, let's say ID2 is assigned to prefix plus count. Okay, what should we get? In this case, mem2, right? Because count has been changed, but prefix has not been changed. Okay, so this is like warm-up for you to try. And how we combine the static and non-static variables together is going to be very similar to what we are doing here, very similar, okay? The only complication we are adding is creating objects and using attributes. That's the only complication. Abstractly speaking, we are really doing the same thing. Okay, now I want you to pay attention to this. The count over here, there's a critical question you want to ask yourself. When we put this into member, right, to the member, should the count be a attribute or should it be a static variable? I'll put a question here, but we'll try. The count here, should it be an attribute or should it be a static variable? It's a question, but we'll find out why one will work, but the other one wouldn't work. It's really important to know. Okay, we're going to find out. Okay. As a very quick summary, what's the difference between non-static versus static? Okay. When we talk about non-static versus static, this is how you can think of it. Non-static simply means it's local to individual objects. And that means every object is going to have their separate copy of the value. That's attributes, right? What about static? Static means, as opposed to local, it's going to be global. Global and such that it's shared by all the objects. Okay, you can also refer to the lecture before the strike. I think I also used some other more systematic example to show you what's the difference between the two. Okay, hopefully that will also help. But now, let's give you some ROM implementation, okay, using non-static. And we should really see why it wouldn't work. Okay, so now we're basically going to do exactly what a warm-up exercise is showing you here. We're going to have something like a prefix and something like a count. Okay, that's what we'll do. Okay, let's see how that would help. Okay, first of all, let's see, we can have, first of all, we have string called ID for every member. For every member, they have an ID. And then we also have something like string and prefix. And we also get something called count. Like that, okay? Now, let's do the following. Inside the constructor over here, let's try to say, whatever we do over here, we're going to repeat the same thing for the second version over here. So you can see we got two versions of the member over here, right? That's something we got to make sure we do, okay? Okay. So now, Let me do something very similar to what I wrote on the board. Okay, if I say ID is simply assigned the prefix, okay, let me just do this. So the prefix is always going to be man, okay? And then ID is going to be prefix plus ID. And then what I should do is ID plus plus, right? Oh, beg your pardon. Count plus count. And then count plus plus. Okay, that will make sense. Pretty much corresponding to what I wrote on the board. Okay, so now would this work? That's a question, right? Okay, and then we'll do something very similar for the second version as well. Just do something just the same. Okay, that means every time when you're trying to create a member objects, you're just going to create the ID for this new member objects. And every time after the creation of the member objects, we're going to create a count, hopefully from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. That's what we hope for. Okay? And now, if we try to re-execute the code, are we going to get what we expect? Are we going to? Okay? That's the question. Okay? One more question. What should be the starting value for count? As we can see, what should be the minimum the member ID? As you can see from the shop tester over here, you can see it's count start from 1 and then go to 2 and then go to 3, right? That's something you should really pay attention to. So what we can do is, if you want to give some initial value over here, this is what we can do. We can say that count is assigned to 1 initially, okay? And then after creating each member, we're going to increment that, okay? And then we do the same thing for the second version. It's assigned to 1. Okay, make sure we start from 1. So now the question is, are we going to get man1 for Alan and man2 for Mark? Are we going to get that? That's the question. Let's see. Okay, you can see that no, man1 and man1, Alan and Mark. But why? Why is that the case? Okay, let's try to figure out. Okay, let's now go back here and see that this is how we created Alan and Mark. So for Alan, we call the first version of the constructor. For Mark, we call the second version of the constructor, right? That's the difference. So now, but how was these constructor are going to make a difference? Are they going to make a difference? Okay, let's see. So now, I'm going to draw also on the board. Okay. Let's now look at the first line here. If you look at line number 24, how is that going to work? Okay, for line number 24, we're going to call version 1 of the constructor in member and create Alan. Let's do that very quickly. That means Alan is going to point to a member objects. Okay? And then what attributes do we have? We have quite many attributes. Let me try to make these things, okay, let me just do everything here, okay? I think it's quite important, okay? Alan here, and remember we got balance. In this case, it's been set to 20.0. So that part is fine. That part is working properly. And we got ID, we got prefix, and we got count, right? We got ID, we got prefix, and we have count, okay? So these are the 3 attributes we have to fill in. According to version number 1, this is what we have to execute. Let's just try to follow that line by line. Line number 1, count is going to be 1. So we put 1 here, okay? Okay, this second line here, prefix will be assigned to man. So the prefix will be assigned to man. Okay, and then we go to the next line. ID will be assigned to prefix plus count. Okay, what's prefix plus count? This concatenate with this. So we will get basically man 1. That seems to work. Seems to work. Okay, at least for the first objects. Okay, now let's go to the second line we should pay attention to. Now let's go to line number 33 of the shop tester. What's going to happen when we call this constructor here? Okay, it's going to call version 2 of the constructor, which does exactly the same thing, exactly the same. Okay, let's do it again. Okay, for this one here, we're going to have mark, and then mark is going to point to some member objects here. And then we have all the same attributes. So we have balance, we have ID, we have prefix, and we have count. Okay, so what do we expect to see at this point? Because from the previous first member, we would, oh, there's something I forgot to update. Once we set the ID for the previous one to be mem1, and we will actually increment the count by 1, right? So now the question is, how do we modify that count to be plus plus? That means modify this from 1 to 2. Remember, the count attribute is non-static at this point. So every object of member has a separate copy of this variable, of these attributes. So when you say the count has been incremented from 1 to 2, does it affect at all any other objects of member? It does not. So that's the intuition. Okay? But now let's go back to this line here, and let's continue with that. So now to create a mark, we actually have to call the second version of the constructor. So over here, so we're going to execute exactly the same number of lines. Let's go again, go over line by line. First of all, count is going to be 1, right? Count is going to be 1, the same. And then prefix is going to be mem. ID is going to be prefix concatenated with count. So it's also going to give us mem1. That's not correct because it should be mem2, not mem1. But the problem is when you were trying to increment the ln.count, it cannot affect mark.count because the count was non-static. They're completely separate copies. You just cannot inference one by the other. Okay, that's the problem. So what's the solution to this? Static. You want to somehow make sure the count over here, whenever you increment the count, is going to be visible by all the member objects. That's the tricky thing. That's the key. Okay? So what I have just illustrated so far for this counting mechanism was wrong. Okay? I just want to show you so you don't do it. Okay? So now how do we fix that? Okay? The fix is rather easy. Let me just draw that on the diagram first, and then we'll see how we can implement that. The idea is we know that the count over here for Alan and Mark, we want them to be somehow shared rather than being separate copies. To make them be shared, conceptually it looks like this. So we don't want the count to belong to any of the objects. Let me just wipe it out for now. Also, count shouldn't be there. Okay? So that means we got only 3 attributes instead. So what we should do is somehow we want to maintain globally a static variable called count. Okay? And this static variable globally is going to be shared by all the member objects. Initially, we're going to give its value 1. And Alan is going to use this particular value, 1. And then after Alan has been signed its ID, we're going to increment 1 to 2. So that when we actually try to create Mark, it's going to see this 2, right? So that's kind of the idea. Okay, how do we fix that? Okay, to fix it, let's try. All we got to do is non-static is not good, static. Okay, how do we give an initial value to the static variable? What we do is we do it directly after you declare that. That's only some exception you have to take. Okay? Static variable to be shared by all the member objects. Okay? That's going to be the count. That's it. You can see just by adding static, it's going to make a huge difference. Okay? So now after we have done this, so we don't have to initialize count to be 1 anymore. Not anymore. Okay, and that's it. Let's see how that will work. Oops, did I miss anything? Let's see. I might have missed something over here. So that's static over here, and then we'll say count plus plus, right? Static count is equal to 1, and then we will have man, and then ID is assigned to prefix plus the count, and then count plus plus. Looks right to me. Let's try again. I hope I didn't do anything wrong. Let's see. Shop tester. Alan and Mark. Okay, good. Mark.getID and Alan.getID. Interesting. Does not really show me man1 and man2. There's got to be something I did wrong. Let me just try to check very quickly. So that's the first version of constructor over here, and then after that we say count plus plus. I'm pretty sure I'm doing the right thing. Just let me check. As you can see, it's a tricky one, but hopefully I can just disambiguate for you in just one moment. Okay, you will say that static and plus plus. Static integer is assigned to 1. Okay. And then after this, we're going to increment the counter by 1. What about, let's see the debugger very quickly and see what happened, okay? I'm still not convinced why it wouldn't produce 1 and 2, okay? Did I miss anything? Which line are you talking about?
See your first member where it's double balanced?
Yeah.
When it has the count plus plus, wouldn't that make your member 2, like mem2?
Should be meant to. It should.
Right?
It should.
Because this is like the solution that I came up with. Like,
Yeah.
it's working, but I put
Yeah, you know,
like,
it,
count at 0 and went to 1 and 2.
it should work, but let me just, guys, let me run the debugger very quickly, okay? And then let's find out, okay? Yeah. Let's go back to our shop tester over here. Let's find out. Okay, let's get this right. Okay, first of all, let's get the this guy here. And then, remember, put a breakpoint here. And then what we will do is, we'll go for debugger. Okay, let's try that. Okay, first of all, you can see that over here. Let me just make this a little bit bigger. Okay, we haven't created Alan just yet. Okay, let's see how we do it. Okay, we'll actually step into it over here, and the static counter is going to be 1. Okay, and then, okay, so now we're calling the first version of the constructor here. So we're going to definitely get, okay, so now after this, count should become 2. Okay, good. Okay, Alan.getID should really give us oh, I got it. Guys, don't make the same mistake. Yeah, I got it. Do you see why? I was doing the right thing, but I didn't really change the method. Now I got it. But you know what? One thing that we really learned from this, debugger is really powerful. Right? Good. Okay, I got it. You know, as soon as I got it, I don't need to use debugger anymore. Okay. Hopefully you see what's wrong. Okay. Good. Okay, let's change that. Let's change that. What's really ridiculous about me was I changed everything to be right in the member over here. You can see static, count, and everything here was right. But when you say get ID, I'm still always returning mem1. That's not right. What should I return? Return ID. right? Because remember, in each version of the constructor, I actually got ID to be assigned, to be the proper value, right? Okay? That could be a nice exam question though, right? So please, make sure you understand what's going on here. Okay, let's just try one more time. Of course, you can say this.id, right? Exactly, mem2, okay? Good, hopefully you kind of follow, okay? Okay, now, guys, let me just say one more thing, okay, before I leave this point to you. The use of static and non-static is actually not too bad. All you gotta remember is, whenever you talk about static, that means it's global. You talk about non-static, you just local copy for individual objects, okay? Let's try to see that one more time, okay? What I want to show you is over here, okay? You know what, I'll write it on the, oh no, I wouldn't write it on the board. Again, line number 24, over here, when we first create, let me run it by execution like a debugger on the board one more time, okay? Okay? First of all, when you look at the member class over here, you can see there is a single variable over here called count. And it's static, so that means it's going to be shared by all the objects of type member. And the initial value should be 1, okay? Initial value, that's how we begin with, okay? And now, when you go to the shop tester over here, line number 24, okay? Over here, we try to create Alan using the first version of constructor. If you go there, the first version over here is basically going to use the current value of the count and then figure out that the ID should be prefix plus count, right? So that's going to be mem1. Okay, so 1 over here is correct, okay? On the other hand, okay, that shouldn't be there. So now let's go to the next line. Let's go back to shop tester here. If you move on to line number 33, okay, over here. If you go back there, so you will see that we are trying to call the second version of the constructor, which is here. Okay, now, how does it work? Works in a similar way. Over there, what we're gonna do is, oh, one thing I forgot to change. Okay, let's go back here. When we were trying to call the first version of the constructor, remember the last line is going to be count plus plus. That means after creating Alan, we're going to increment this from 1 to 2. Okay? And then when we come to line number 33 to create a second member objects, we're going to basically execute the same block of code over here. And then over here, it's going to use the current value for count, which is 2. It has been incremented by the previous creation. So it's going to be men plus 2, which would be men2. And don't forget, it's also going to increment this from 2 to 3. So what does that mean? If you're trying to create a third member object, it's going to be men3. So that's kind of the automatic counting works. Okay. One more thing to show you. You might be wondering about, so here I'm trying to repeat 3 lines of code over here. Also, I'm trying to repeat 3 lines of code over here, right? Basically the same. So whenever you got duplicates of code, it's not a very good practice for you. So one way to fix this, nothing wrong with the implementation now. I'm just trying to help you improve. What I can do is I can try to factor out the common block of code into a helper method. That's what we do. Okay, what I can do is I can just create a helper. So this part is optional. Helper method. So we get a void, and then let's say setup ID, for example. Okay, so what I can do is I can simply copy, cut and paste this block of code, and then I'll simply call that particular method, setup ID, right? Just call that. And similarly, I can also do that. Okay, like that. Okay, execute the code again. You still get men1 and men2. Okay, I would say the use of static and non-static might be the trickiest part for lab test 3, right in the beginning. Okay? Are we okay so far? Okay? Yes.
So I can use these methods, like methods where we have to use it
Uh-huh.
to like make sure.
Yes, so whenever you identify any duplicates of a fragment of code, you can try to factor them out into a helper method, and you call the helper method. Yeah. You will see more examples like that maybe in 2030 in the more advanced level of courses. Okay, guys, any questions about this? Are we okay? Okay, if we are okay, we'll just go on. Okay, I will try to go at least maybe until 4:30. I can tell you that up to this point, I'm quite comfortable to leave the rest to you because I will definitely give you the solution tonight. I'll release the solution. But at the same time, I think for the rest of the developments over here, they correspond quite closely to how you did for lab number 5, which I created a series of tutorial videos for you already. So if you were able to do lab 5, you should have no trouble for the remaining part. So the main part I really want to get through, which I did, was about how to use static versus non-static. If you understand that part there, you can definitely finish the remaining part quite easily. But I will just do as much as possible until 4:30, and then I will take your questions, okay? Okay, let's go on. Okay, so now, this might be something good to illustrate for another 15 to 20 minutes, and then I can just leave that to you, leave the rest to you. Now, let's try to understand the next line, okay? I want you to read this line over here, and try to think just to yourself, what should you do? Apparently, you can see that this line does not compile, right? I want you to ask yourself the following questions. First, should you create an accessor, constructor, or mutator? Question number 1. Question number 2, how should you implement it? Okay, think about it just for a few seconds. Meanwhile, I'm going to reproduce this line on the board. I can tell you that it is more like principle number 2 or 3. So you gotta decide which one it is, okay? So I'm going to do something on the board over here. Okay, here. Okay, so now let's reproduce the line 27 on the board, and let's try to understand that together. Order, square brackets, and then we have Allen orders. Is assigned to something here. We say Allen.get orders. Okay, like that. That's line number 27. Okay. Okay. Let's try to understand that. Should it be a constructor? No, right? There's no new keyword here. Hopefully you can tell that right away. Should it be an accessor or mutator? To make a decision here, think about whether this context here applies to principle number 2 or principle number 3, right? Are we trying to use the value from the method call or not? We are, right? Because you can see that this method call here does not just stand by itself. It is actually used as the right-hand side of the assignments over here. Okay, first of all. So we know that this guy over here should be accessor. Okay, but the complication, this is slight more complication on the left-hand side. Now, what's the type? Okay, let me make it more clear. Allen over here is the context objects. Okay, remember somewhere previously we say member Allen. Just to bring you to the context. Okay, somewhere. So Allen here is a member objects. Now, what should be the return type? Well, because we agree it should be accessor. But what should be the type? String, integer, double, what should it be? Well, I can tell you the line actually give you a lot of hints. It gives you the precise hints about what a return type should be. Okay, before you answer, let's see. Before, when we said string, let me give you a simple example. If I say string s is assigned to, remember we get O1, right? Order, .get products. And we know very well this should be an accessor. And what should be the return type? Well, you can see that somehow the return type over here can be stored into a variable that is declared to be a string. So it better return string, not integer, right? Yes. Oh, you want to answer that? Yes. Okay. Having understood that very well, the simple case, how about this case? Yes. Should be return an array of orders, right? Yes. Okay. So now, over here, it tells you very well, this should be the return type of this accessor here. Okay, it's a very important analysis I'm trying to do here, right? That's something you have to be able to judge during the lab test. Okay, this I would say that's the most complicated case. Okay. By the way, I'm just curious. If I say something like this, what would that mean? It's like yeah, it's also like an array, but it's two-dimensional, right? Okay, that's something you should also know. Okay, anyway, just as a reminder. Okay, good. Okay, having known this, let's do some decoration first, and then we'll figure out the rest. Okay, so now here we say Alan orders is assigned to Alan.get orders, right? Okay, and over here, let me just go to member over here. So we should have, the order doesn't really matter, but let's be nice. Okay, let's now put things like this. So it's going to be order, square brackets, order array, get orders. And it takes no parameter, right? And now let's just get something to compile. We should put some default value. We can return something. Now, what should I return just to get it to compile? What should I return? Return 0, return empty string, return. That would be a little bit, what's really suggested here was to have a for loop. That's too complicated for now. Yes. Now, okay? Let me just put a now here. It's going to make everything compile. Okay, which is important, but we should know that why now should be the choice rather than 0. Okay, now you can also refer back to the slides about what the default values are for different types. So there are basically two kinds of types in Java. Okay, let's review that very quickly. Okay, that's also important information that I would assume for 2030 when I see you in the fall. Okay. By the way, how many of you have registered in 2030 already? Section A? Okay, section B? What other section are you? Okay, anyway, yeah. That's fine, that's fine. Huh? Me? I'm teaching section B. You're glad that you didn't choose that, or you're glad you chose that? Oh, okay, that's fine. That's okay. Okay, guys, that's not important. If you want to switch to section B, you can try. Okay. Okay, now let me just review over here. Okay, types in Java. Okay, overall there are two kinds of types. One is called primitive. Okay, the other type is called reference. Okay, primitive is easy to know because you can simply enumerate them. Okay, so what are the primitive? So it can be character, it can be integer, it can be double, for example. You can also get float, and also you have long, for example. You can refer back to the slides, and also you get double. Oh, double I got. Okay, good. Okay, so these are the primitive. What about reference? It's easy to remember everything else. If anything that's not primitive, it's got to be a reference. Reference, especially if there is a class. If there's a class for that, that's a reference type. For example, order over here is not primitive because there's a class for that, so that's a reference type. And member is also not a primitive type because there's a member class for that. And the usual confusion is you should know that string is a reference type. It's not primitive. Okay? Now, when we talk about default values, which means if you don't try to initialize a variable, what would be stored there by default? Okay? For integer and long, it will just be 0. And for double and float, it will be 0.0. Oh, I forgot Boolean. Yeah, I thought I actually forgot about something. Boolean, it will be false, right? For character over here, it's the only primitive type. You always need to initialize it. This is a hard rule. Okay? Now, what about reference type? For reference type, you can always not to initialize it, but it has the same default values, which is null. Okay? That is why in this case, since we are trying to use some order, some address over here like an order, so that's why I can just return null as a default value. Okay, good. Now let's try something here. If you simply return null, you got to be careful. Okay, let's try to see. So now everything compiles, nothing's wrong. However, let's try to uncomment this line over here. Let's see what this is trying to do. It's trying to do the following. Remember, Allen orders over here has been assigned to whatever the return value is for Allen.get orders, which is null at the moment, right? And then, because for array, we can always query about its length. So we are simply asking, what's the length of the array? Okay? Let's see what the length of the array is. At the moment, what should it be? When you first created an array? That's a question, right? Now, if you try to execute this code, which compiles, let's see what's going to happen. Do you know what's going to happen? Null pointer exception, very good. But we're going to see why, okay? So let's just verify that you're right, okay? Okay, let's do that. And then you do have a null pointer exception. And if you do see this kind of error, which is very possible in your lab test, you will see that it tells you exactly which line. Double click on that, it tells you line number 28 is where you got a null pointer exception. So null pointer exception simply means, okay, let me make a note for you. Whenever you get null pointer exception, I'll put it here. So you got null pointer exception. Okay? In general, if you're trying to make a method call, let's say if I try, in this case, let's just get exactly what we're trying to do here. Okay? Allen orders that length. Okay? Just try that. Allen orders the length. Like that, okay? In some way, length is more like a predefined method for the array, okay? There's something there already for you to use. If we got null pointer exception for this particular dot notation, so what does that mean? That simply means the context objects does not exist. Remember what, let me just give you one example here. Remember what we said before, or can we take one example here? For example here, let's see here. When we say O1.getProducts, what does that mean? That means look at what's really inside this O1 here, and then locate that to the destined memory location, and then do something about it. But now, if you try to say Alan orders the length, and then it tells you there's a null pointer exception, that means there's nothing valid that's stored over here. It's simply no meaningful address has been stored. And it's simply just null. That's what null pointer exception means. That means you just cannot locate somewhere in the memory. Okay? So what should we do? What we should do is like this. And this has to do with what you did in Lab 5 and also in the tutorial. I'm just going to summarize what you have to do over here, and I'll point out one common mistake, okay? And that'll be it, and I'll take your questions, okay? Okay, let's go back to member here. If I want to make sure every member is going to maintain an array of orders, there's a standard way of doing it, as I explained in detail in the tutorial for Lab 5, okay? Let's recall what we should do. First of all, you should have an array of order. Just call it orders. You should also have a counter, integer, number of orders. So this should not sound strange to you, right? That's something I did, emphasizing a lot in Lab 5. Okay, so we got these two over here, and once you declare these two attributes, what should you do next? You should make sure in the constructor you have to initialize the array to be of certain size, otherwise it will be null, right? So now let's say we assume we are going to start with maximum orders we'll get will be 30, let's say. So you can simply say orders is assigned to new order, and then just put 30. But I will make sure in the lab test 3 instruction, I will tell you what you can assume the size to be. I believe that's also the case for example lab test 3, okay? And then the next slide is optional. You can say number of orders is assigned to, number of orders. It's assigned to 0, okay? You do the same thing for the other versions over here, okay? The same thing, okay? So far, so good. So now, the question is, that means every time when we are trying to create, we're introducing more objects here. Let me just draw it on the board. Let's say when you first create Alan here, that means Alan is now going to have 2 extra attributes. One is called orders, and the other one is called number of orders. Number of orders initially 0. What about the orders array? You can see that it's going to be an array of order, right? Each slot is simply going to store the default value for reference type, which is null, right? Now that means, so nothing I'm talking about right now is new. They have all been set in the tutorial, okay? So now it's going to be pointing to an array over here of size 30. So 0 up to 29. Okay? Initially, they're all pointing to null, initially. Okay, like that. Now, let's go back to the shop tester here. When we see that, when we get, let me show you exactly the line I'm worried about. When we say Alan.get orders, so now rather than returning just null, what can we do? The correct solution should be you use a for loop. I'll do that in just a moment. That's the correct solution, as I mentioned a lot in the tutorial. But now let me give you a very common mistake, okay? And tell you why it is wrong. What about I simply say return orders, okay? First of all, notice that everything still compiles. Nothing's wrong. However, tell me something. What I'm trying to return right now is to say, Alan, who's first initialized, has no orders just yet. And now I say, get Alan's orders. You're returning back to me the entire array with all the null slots. It does not make sense. You should only return to me the array whose size corresponds to exactly how many orders that have been added so far. That would be the correct way of doing it. Okay, but let's understand why this is wrong. Okay, I'll also show you on the debugger. But now let's test it. Okay. Now, question for you before I run the test. Now, given that we're going to return Alan.get orders, is going to return the entire array over here of all the null slots. Question for you: what's going to be Alan's number of orders? The expected result should be 0. But are we going to produce 0 in this case? 30, exactly. And it should be no surprise because we are simply returning this array over here. So let me just make a note to you over here. You can see that when we when we return the orders over here, we are basically returning the entire array over here, right? And now, if you just go back to the shop tester over here, so that means Alan.getOrders is going to return this entire array. So that means Alan orders, which is a variable, is going to refer to this particular array of size 30 always. Doesn't matter how many orders there are. Okay, let's verify that, and then we'll see that also in the debugger. Okay, so you will see that over here, Alan's number of orders, 30, which is wrong. Expected to be 0, okay? Before I show you the correct implementation, let's see how we can see that from the debugger very quickly, okay? Now I just want to show you, let's put a breakpoint here, and then do debug. Okay, we're here, okay? Let's step into it. We'll do step into. Okay, you can see that it's simply going to return orders. What's orders? Orders is simply an array. If you expand it, all the elements are null. Pretty much like what I drew over here, right? Just an array of 30 slots, all being null. Okay, we're going to return that array directly. Okay, let's now step next. And now if you go to the next step, you can see that Alan orders over here from the debugger over here is going to be all null, right? With a 30 slots, right? Exactly 30, so that's wrong. Okay, so now how should we fix this? Okay, so now the way to fix this is very easy. Then that's certainly also covering the tutorial. I'll just finish that and then I will take your questions. Okay, the way to do this is by using a loop. Okay, it's really critical to notice that this counter over here, NOO, number of orders, is extremely important. It tells you exactly how many orders have been added so far. Okay, so what you got to do is like this. Okay, so what I would do is I would say order, just some local variable. I would say orders. Okay, like maybe that's not good because you don't want to duplicate the name of the orders. Let me just say current orders. How about that? Is assigned to new order. So now we want to make sure the size of the return current orders, which means eventually we'll say return current orders, right? But now what should I put here? I want to know exactly how large the array should be. And NOO tells me exactly how large it should be. Okay? And then at the moment, NOO is 0. That means it's going to return an empty array, which is right, because empty array.length will be 0. Okay? But for the non-empty case, all you got to do is you want to make sure you write a for loop, the integer I, 0, I less than, and remember you should not put something like orders.length. This is wrong, I can tell you. And then I'll fix that in just a moment. And current orders I is assigned to orders I. Okay, again, this part here is also explained in complete details in the tutorial. Please review them if you're not confident. It's really important. Okay, now also make sure you understand why this is wrong. Okay, to recap that, and you should really verify this by yourself. If you simply say I is less than orders.length, what's that value there? 30 always, right? So that means every time you're trying to go, okay, let me tell you a very interesting case. Guys, this will be very important, okay? Let's just get this tricky part over and then we are done, okay? Now, tell me something. At the moment, we know that this is wrong, okay? So now, can anyone tell me if I simply just execute this block of code, which compiles, what's going to happen?
This would execute until I think 30 times.
I agree, but you're just in the middle way. What's going to be the consequence of that? Null pointer exception, you're getting there, it's going to be some exception, but not, You don't want to guess, right? You don't want to guess. Okay, I'll give you hints. Tell me something, I'll help you think. If you look at line number 43, how large is the array that's going to be created? Yeah, you're jumping too far, okay? Yeah, that's okay, that's fine. Yeah, we want to take it slowly for everybody. That's okay, but you're right, okay. Okay, guys, let's do it again. In line number 43, when Alan was first created, there was no order. That means NOO will just be 0. So from line number 43, current orders will be just an empty array. Agree? Good. Let's see over here. Let me just draw that on the board so you know exactly what's happening here. So current orders over here is going to be pointing to just an empty array. It's not null, just empty. It's this in the array, just empty. Okay? And then let's go to the next line over here, which is line number 44. Now, when we get to this part here, okay, tell me something. I want you to look at specifically this, remember we said this is so-called a state condition for the for loop, right? If it is true, go into the loop. If it is false, exit from the loop. Now, is this going to evaluate true or false? I is 0. Orders the length, 30. 0 less than 30, true. That means we'll go into here. So what specifically are we going to do? We're going to say, I will say CO for current orders. Current orders at position 0 is assigned to orders 0. Okay? Anything wrong with that? It compiles, no problem. But is there going to be anything wrong at a runtime? Let's look at the right-hand side. When I say I want to go to index 0 for the orders array, that should be okay because the orders array over here has length 30. I can just go to 0, 1, 2, 3, up to 29, right? So the right-hand side is fine. What about left-hand side? What's the size of current orders? 0. So that means there's no valid index for this empty array, but you're trying to access that using index 0. So you get in trouble, right? So that's why you will compile, but you'll run into runtime exception, specifically array index out of bound exception. Whenever you pass an invalid index to the array, it's going to be such exception. Let's double check with that, and then we'll fix it. Okay, that's exactly what you have. You will have array index out of bound exception. So I would suggest when you watch the recording later, try to reproduce this error by yourself and try to see why exactly it's happening, right? Okay, it's really happening. Now, how should we fix that? Well, it's really about this state condition here, which I keep emphasizing in the tutorial. Use number of orders over here. So the advantage of using this is, right now, if the length, if there's no order for Alan, NOO is going to be 0, right? So that means 0 less than 0 will be false. That means it's going to prevent us from going into the loop and doing the execution, right? Okay, so that will be the correct implementation for that. Of course, there will be more methods you have to add. You got to add the method for add order, you got to add a method for checkout, and etc. I'm going to make the solution available tonight or early tomorrow morning for you. However, I would suggest, if you really understand what I have covered so far, try the example test 3 from scratch just by yourself. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to do it independently during the remediation. Okay? So now, any questions? So I didn't really cover thoroughly, but pretty much I will feel comfortable to leave you independent. But let me just take questions. Okay, guys, if you need to leave, please leave quietly. I will take as many questions as you have. Yes? Say that again. Uh-huh. Tuesday, Thursday, you mean the remediation schedule?
Yeah, no, for Williams Small Center's labs.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, 3:30 to 5.
3:30 to 5, you mean for you to test your app, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah, so for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to announce the hours for you to draw by the WSC. It's going to be different time. I'll announce it. Just pay attention to Moodle.
I went there today and no one was there.
I know. I'll make sure they're there for the next 2 weeks. Okay, guys, any more questions? Okay, if you have no questions, I will see you in the remediation. Okay?